Alright, welcome back guys. Today we'll be diving in depth into Blender's motion tracking system. For a long time I was really reluctant to give it a real shot, but in the past few weeks I've been playing a lot with Blender's motion tracking, and I think that I've finally managed to fully grasp everything that it offers. So yeah, now's the time to make a video about it. If you've never done motion tracking, this might look confusing to you, but trust me, it's way simpler than it looks. And after some practice, you'll be able to track pretty much everything in less than few minutes. We'll be working with this simple shot today, and thanks to my friend Vukashin who helped me film this earlier. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. I will click on a little plus button over here and I will add a new workspace. We're going to go into VFX and choose motion tracking. The new workspace will pop up and we'll explain everything briefly. So on the top right side you got your classic 3D viewport. On the top left we got this advanced dope sheet which we're not going to use in this video. So I'm just simply going to join it with our 3D viewport. In the middle we got our tracking layout, and on the bottom we got our graph editor. So to start with everything, we're first going to open our clip that we prepared. We're going to click on open and I will choose the motion track Blender clip. It's going to load up, but the first thing that you will see is that the colors are a little bit off. I filmed this in log profile, but I did a basic correction just so you don't have to watch a washed out footage. So first we're going to go into our render properties, and under color management we're going to change filmic to standard. And as you can see, we got a little bit of that colors and saturation back. So the first important thing that we have to do is to make sure that our blend file has same FPS output as our original clip. So under the output properties we're going to change our frame rate to 24 FPS because we filmed this in 24 FPS. Okay, now we can actually jump to the tracking tab, and the first thing we're going to do is press the set scene frames button, and the Blender will automatically cut our composition to the length of our clip. The next thing we're going to do is press prefetch, and what prefetch does is it basically loads our video into the cache so we can have a smoother playback without lagging. I'm going to pull this 3D viewport up because we're not going to need it right now, and to properly motion track something you need to add tracking markers to the points of high contrast. So what we're searching for is basically these areas of a high contrast that we need to add our markers to. If you press Ctrl left click you can do that manually, but Blender is pretty good at determining what the points of high contrast are, so we're going to let the Blender do it instead of ourselves. In the tracking settings we have this pattern and search size which we're going to leave at the default values. What they change is basically how big the search area for our tracking points are. As for the motion model, we have to look at our clip and determine what's happening. So if we scrub through our clip, we can see that it's a pretty simple shot. And we have some different options here. Most of them are used for basic stuff, but this affine and perspective, they're usually used if you have some skewing or perspective shifting in your shot. Because our shot is simple, we're going to keep it at location and rotation. And for match, I figured out that previous frame gives more precise results. So we're going to pick that and tell Blender to compare our tracks to the previous keyframe and not the first frame that it tracked. We're also going to check normalize, and under the extra settings we're going to put correlation to 0.9. What it does is it basically tells Blender to consider tracks that are 90% accurate. We won't change rate because it's mostly used for some advanced tracking, and if you're doing some simple stuff you can just simply leave it at 1, and that means that all of our track points will be of the same importance. So now we can position our playhead on first frame and press detect features. Blender automatically found some solid tracking points, but we're going to expand this detect features window to tweak these settings a little bit. So Blender needs only 8 tracks to solve the camera. If you have 8 good tracks, that should be pretty much enough, but I suggest to always put as much tracks as you can and not to delete even the unnecessary ones if they are not hurting your camera solve. So for example, you can see that Blender found some tracking points on this woman. Those are not necessarily needed, but we will leave them here and clean them up afterwards. So one more benefit of having a lot of track points is that you can more easily recreate the geometry when you're finished with tracking. So we're going to lower the threshold to a really low value, for example 0.01, and we're going to decrease the distance between the points. Now that we got that out of the way, we can simply press Ctrl T and let Blender do its magic. As you can see, we lost a lot of markers in the process, but like I said, I like to have a lot of markers, so we will try and add some new ones. We can press Alt D and hide all the markers that have died, and I'll position my playhead to the point where we're kind of losing most of them, let's say right here. And now I'm on frame 104 and I'm simply going to press detect features. We've detected a lot of new markers, and what I'll do now is first I will press this little button right here and track all the newly added markers backwards. Let's do that right now. And I will go back to the frame 104 and track them all forwards. As you can see, we lost a lot of them once again, and for the last time I will detect more features and I will repeat the process once again. I can say that we're pretty much done with adding markers, and all of our markers are represented in the graph down below. So what we're looking for here is for this line in the graph to be as straight as it can be. We're going to go to the Solve tab and we're going to tweak some settings here. We're going to leave the tripod unchecked because we didn't film this on a tripod obviously, and for me the most important settings where Blender usually fails is to determine which keyframes are used for reconstruction. If we check the keyframe button, the Blender will automatically pick 2 keyframes for us, but we're not going to do that and we're going to pick them manually. manually. So I will find a good starting point, and that will be, for example, frame 40, or maybe a little bit earlier, let's say 26. In the keyframe A, I will type 26, and for our second keyframe, I will pick, for example, let's say frame 124. In the Refine tab, it's most important to check the focal length, but we can simply check all of these settings and press Solve Camera Motion. The Blender finished our first solve, and the solve error that we got is 6.5 pixels. So what our goal is here is to get this solve error as low as we can. Under 1 pixel will be fine for most of situations, but if you want to be 100% sure, I would say get it to around 0.5 pixels. So now we need to delete all the tracks that are hurting our camera solve. I can go to the Cleanup tab and press Clean Tracks, and first we're going to select all the tracks with a really high reproduction error. You should do this incrementally and start with a really high number. So let's select all the tracks that have reproduction error more than 15. In the Action tab we can press Delete Track and Blender will delete all of those tracks. Now that we're finished, we can press Solve Camera Motion, and as you can see we have already dropped our solve error to 2.5 pixels. We're going to clean the tracks once again, and we'll say delete all the tracks with reproduction error more than 10, for example. We're going to delete them right now, and we'll press Solve Camera Motion, and we're still about 2 pixels, so we have to do this few more times. So let's say clean all tracks higher than 5, and once again all tracks higher than, for example, 2.5, and we're pretty much close to getting under 1 pixel, so I will tweak it now a little bit more. And as you can see, we got our solve error to a perfect 0.5 pixels. We're pretty much done right here, so we can set up our scene now. I'm going to scroll a little bit down and press Setup Tracking Scene. If we press numpad 0, we can jump to a camera view, and you will see it a little bit better right here. And what we have to do right here is fix the orientation to get this perfectly aligned. So we will go now to the Layout tab, and we will drop down the Overlay panel and check the motion tracking button. We can delete the point light because we're not going to need it. And as you can see, all of these markers are representing our geometry. If you want to scale them a little bit down, you can decrease the size, and all that's left to do is to line up our geometry. So let's hop back to the motion tracking tab, and the first thing we need to tell Blender is what our ground is. So to do that, you have to select 3 markers that are on the ground, and you can just simply press floor. As you can see, everything is perfectly aligned now, so we can select 2 of these markers and press Set Scale. That didn't actually do anything, but we can do it ourselves, so we'll select the plane and the cube and scale it down a little bit. And if you press A, you can select everything and line it up to a right axis. So let's say somewhere right here. I'm going to get this cube above the ground, and we're going to scale our floor to fit the camera. When it comes to motion tracking, you can say that we're pretty much done, but I'm not going to leave you hanging like this, so I will show you some tips and tricks for compositing. If we play our clip, you can see that our cube is now perfectly tracked into our footage. Our ground is by default set to be a shadow catcher, and if we jump to Object Properties and go into the Visibility tab, we can make sure that it is a shadow catcher indeed. So when it comes to compositing, you can do everything in Blender, but what I like to do is to render my CG elements separately and composite it in After Effects. So the first thing that we're going to do is to go to the Render Properties, and under the film we're going to check Transparent. If we render this out, you can see how this looks rendered, and the most important thing to making your CG footage look believable is to match lights with the real life footage. Right now we don't have any lights in our scene, and this won't be a tutorial on how to match lights, so that will be a topic for another video. But what I will show you is if you go to the Compositing tab, you can see that Blender automatically sets everything up for ourselves. If you want to render everything separately, you can just simply delete all of this and plug your render layer into the composite and into the viewer node. I'm going to add some lighting to our scene, and I will do that by using the Easy HDRI plugin. The ideal scenario is to have a 360 HDRI image of your environment, or rather HDRI of your location, but you can always find some pretty good free HDRIs on the internet. So we're going to choose the one that kinda matches our lighting, and if we go now to the View Layer Properties and check Render Single Layer and press Render, we will now have a simple render of our CG added elements. Of course, for this tutorial we're not going to render out this cube, and we have to do something goofy, so in advance I've prepared some questionable animations. I've now imported it and I'm going to scale it to a appropriate size. If we position it and try to match it with our footage. And one thing that I forgot to mention is that Blender automatically creates this foreground and background view layer. So after deleting everything from Compositing tab, you can just simply drag all of your assets into the foreground and delete the background. So because the light of our original shot was coming from this awkward angle, and the sun was hitting only the top of my friend's head, for realistic purposes we're going to put this cop into the shade, and if we play our footage you can see that our 3D element is now perfectly composited. All that comes afterwards is just tweaking the lights, colors and making everything look believable. And yeah, this totally looks believable. That would be all for this basic introduction to the Blender's motion tracking system. I think we pretty much covered all the important stuff, and if you want a more advanced motion tracking tutorial, be sure to leave a like and comment down below. Thank you guys for all the support that you have shown up until now. Once again, my name was Milos and I'll see you guys in the next video.